Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at how science really gets done, International research collaboration, IRC.
Yeah.
We've got this study about Europe and how it's kind of a big deal there.
Right.
We always think of like the lone genius in the lab.
Yeah, the myth of the lone genius.
But these days it's all about teams, right? Global teams.
Absolutely. Science is a team sport now more than ever.
And Europe's really leading the way, but it's not like a perfect utopia of collaboration.
Right.
Right. There are winners and losers even when you're working internationally.
Yeah, definitely some interesting dynamics at play.
So we're going to unpack that, what's driving it all, what it means for the future. And get this, the study finds individual scientists have a ton of power now.
Oh, yeah. Huge shift in that direction.
In this whole global research game.
The individual researcher is really at the heart of it. And this study, what large-scale publication and citation data tell us about international research collaboration in Europe, changing national patterns in global contexts?
Okay, so catchy title.
Right. By Marek, Kwiek. Really highlights this whole shift,
Yeah.
IRC in Europe has just exploded in the last decade.
Exploded, really. So, give you some numbers. What are we talking here?
Well, back in 1996, only about 24% of scientific papers from Europe had authors from, at least 2 different countries.
Right.
By 2018, that's almost doubled, almost 46%.
Wow.
And it's not just the percentage, it's the raw numbers.
Okay.
We're talking about going from 75,000 articles to almost 280,000.
So way more papers, way more collaboration.
Exactly. It's not just happening, it's accelerating.
It's like science has gone global, at warp speed.
It really has.
So what's fueling this? Is it just the money? EU funding and all that?
You'd think so, right? I mean, the EU does give a lot of money to these international projects.
Right.
But here's the thing. They actually compared in this study how much countries spend on research to how much they collaborate internationally. And it's kind of a weak link.
Really?
Yeah, some countries spend tons, but they're not collaborating that much internationally.
So it's not just about chasing the EU money.
Right. There's something else going on.
So what is it then? What's the secret sauce bringing these teams together?
Well, the study suggests it's about getting the best minds together no matter where they are.
Right.
If you want a big breakthrough,
yeah,
why limit yourself to just your own country?
Makes sense.
It's like assembling a scientific dream team.
Global talent search.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just about ticking a box on a grant application.
Ooh.
Scientists are actually choosing who to work with strategically.
It's a strategic advantage.
So who are the superstars then? Which countries are really killing it in this IRC game?
Well, it's not just about size. Some smaller countries are doing incredibly well. Yeah, places like Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands.
Okay.
Even Estonia, Finland, Ireland. They're all big players.
Estonia. Interesting. The only EU13 country you've mentioned so far.
Yeah, good point. But of course, you've got the big guys too. UK, France. They're in the mix.
Right. But what about America? They're still a scientific powerhouse.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. is still the #1 partner for most European countries.
So it's like a scientific power couple.
Kind of, yeah, with a long history of collaboration.
But, just because you collaborate a lot doesn't mean the research is good.
That's true. Quantity doesn't always equal quality.
So how do we know if these collaborations are actually producing impactful work?
Well, that's where this idea of citation premium comes in.
Citation premium.
Yeah, it's basically how much more likely a paper is to get cited by other researchers.
Oh, okay. So how much buzz it's generating in the scientific community.
Exactly. More citations, bigger impact.
So what does the study say about the citation premium for these European collaborations?
Well, they found a big difference when they compared the EU15.
The more, established science nations?
Right, with the EU13 who joined the EU later.
And are still kind of catching up, research-wise.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that papers from those EU13 countries, they actually get a way bigger citation boost when they collaborate internationally.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's like they're tapping into this global network of expertise and resources.
Yeah, and getting their work seen on a much bigger stage.
Exactly.
But are we really talking about countries collaborating? Or is it more like individual scientists making choices?
You've hit on a really important point there. It's about individual scientists. And that's actually what we're going to be diving into next.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break and then we'll get into that.
Sounds great.
So we were talking about how scientists are really the ones driving all these international collaborations, but practically speaking, that must be so complicated. coordinating research across different countries, languages, all that.
Yeah, definitely. The study actually calls these coordination costs, and they can be a big deal.
Yeah, I bet. Like things getting lost in translation. Not just language, but like expectations and stuff.
Exactly. Different ways of working, different priorities.
Does it ever like outweigh the benefits of collaborating?
I mean, it's a risk for sure,
Yeah.
but the study talks about strategies to deal with that.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Well, communication is key, obviously.
Yeah.
Setting really clear goals from the start and, just basic respect for everyone involved.
Yeah, makes sense. Sounds like the foundation of any good relationship, really.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But also, technology plays a huge role these days.
Oh, yeah, true. We're so connected now.
Right. Video calls, shared workspaces online, even real-time translation tools.
It's like having a virtual lab where everyone can like brainstorm together,
Exactly.
no matter where they are. Pretty amazing. But, we've been focusing on the good stuff. What about the downsides? Are there risks to all this international collaboration?
There definitely can be. One thing they mentioned in the study is that if, say, a less developed country
Okay.
gets too reliant on collaborating with the U.S., for example.
Right, the big science players.
Yeah, they might not develop their own research infrastructure as well.
It's like if you always borrow your neighbor's tools.
Exactly. You never build your own workshop.
Right. You got to invest in yourself, too.
Another risk is all this focus on international stuff might mean we neglect local research.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's great to be part of the global conversation, but...
But you got to take care of your own backyard, too.
Right. So it's about finding that balance.
Which kind of brings us back to the individual scientist.
Yeah.
The study really emphasizes their role, doesn't it?
It does. It says ultimately how much and what kind of international research happens.
Okay.
It all comes down to the choices of individual scientists.
So they're weighing the pros and cons.
Yeah. Seeing who's attractive to work with.
Deciding if going international even fits their goals.
It's not just following the money or chasing prestige.
Much more complex than I realized at first.
It is. And this individual decision-making is getting more and more important.
As science becomes this global network,
Exactly.
it's almost like we're moving away from science being controlled by governments towards something much more bottom-up.
Absolutely. Researcher-driven.
Which makes you wonder, can the old systems keep up? The funding, the institutions?
It's a big challenge. Can funding adapt to this new reality?
Right. Can national science agendas even make sense when researchers are thinking globally?
Huge questions, and ones that policymakers and institutions are wrestling with right now.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into policy, I want to go back to something you said earlier.
Okay.
About the risk of IRC taking attention away from local research needs.
Yeah.
How do we make sure we don't forget about those local issues while we're busy collaborating globally?
Right. It's like, how do we stop scientific brain drain where everyone's focused on the global stuff?
Exactly. And one thing the study suggests is getting more people outside academia involved.
Oh, interesting. So like policymakers, community groups, even industry.
Exactly. People who are dealing with the real-world problem.
So the research stays connected to what people actually need.
It's about bridging that gap between the ivory tower and the real world.
Where the research can actually be used, make a difference.
Absolutely. International collaboration, it's a tool, not the end goal in itself.
A way to use global knowledge to solve problems, both global and local.
Right.
This has been really eye-opening. International collaboration is so much more complex than I thought.
It is.
We've got these individual ambitions driving global networks, huge potential for amazing discoveries, but also the risk of forgetting about local needs.
Right. It's all interconnected.
It's fascinating how this is all playing out in different fields of science. Did the study look at those differences, like how various disciplines approach international collaboration?
It did. And there's this really striking finding about the contrast between fields that are naturally collaborative, like the natural sciences,
Okay.
and those that are usually more individualistic, like the humanities.
That's interesting. It's almost like there are different cultures of collaboration.
Yeah, you could say that. In physics, chemistry, biology, international collaboration's been the norm for ages.
Right. They need to share data, resources, all that.
Exactly. Especially for those big projects. Particle physics experiments, genome sequencing, things like that.
But in the humanities, it's always been more about the lone scholar, right, working on their own specific topic.
Traditionally, yeah. But even there, we're seeing a shift towards more international partnerships.
Really? So even in fields that haven't embraced collaboration before?
The study found it's on the rise. And it's actually having a big impact on citation rates,
Wow.
especially for researchers from less developed countries.
So it's like everyone's realizing the benefits of this global network of knowledge.
It seems that way.
It's kind of breaking down those walls between different fields of science.
Yeah, I think so. It's a pretty exciting time to be a researcher, no matter what you're studying.
But are there any areas where international collaboration isn't as common? Or maybe not even that helpful?
The study does suggest that in fields that are really focused on national or local stuff,
Okay.
like certain areas of social science or medical research,
Right.
the benefits of IRC might not be as strong.
Like if you're studying a specific country's healthcare system,
Exactly. You need people who really understand that context.
the local policies, the culture, all that.
But even then, there's value in talking to people in other countries who are working on similar problems.
Right, to compare notes, share ideas.
Exactly. Getting different perspectives. So it really depends on the field.
The research question, what the researchers want to achieve.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
But those basic principles of good communication, shared goals, respect.
Those seem to be universal.
And it all comes back to choice. The study emphasizes that, right?
Yeah. International collaboration shouldn't be a requirement.
Scientists have to decide if it's right for them.
And choose their partners carefully.
This has been such a fascinating look at international research collaboration.
I agree.
It's not just about countries working together. It's about individual scientists making connections, sharing knowledge.
Pushing the boundaries of what we know.
But like with any big change, there are challenges.
Definitely.
How do we make sure this benefits everyone? How do we shape the future of global science? That's something we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how international research is changing, individual scientists, global networks, all that. But where does this all lead? Like, what's the big picture for the future of science? Are we heading towards some kind of, like, global scientific community?
It's definitely a possibility, right?
Yeah.
The study kind of hints at that. That whole traditional idea of science being a national thing.
Yeah. With governments calling the shots and controlling the money.
Yeah.
That's being challenged, I think, by this whole movement of researchers connecting across borders.
It's like the power is shifting. Individual scientists have more say now than ever.
Right.
But does that mean, like, national science systems are going to disappear?
I don't think so. Governments and funding agencies are still important, for supporting research, providing infrastructure, setting those big picture priorities.
Okay.
But they got to adapt. That old way of doing things, top-down dictating the research agenda,
Yeah.
that just doesn't work anymore in this globalized world.
So it's about finding a new balance then. How do we support this global science thing while still recognizing that countries have their own interests?
That's the big question, isn't it? One idea is to make funding more flexible, so researchers can collaborate internationally without all the bureaucracy and red tape.
It's like building bridges between different funding systems instead of trying to create one giant global one.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
funding's just one part of it. What about the institutions themselves? Universities, research labs?
They're still mostly organized by country, right?
Yeah, and they're going to have to change if they want to stay competitive.
Attract the best researchers.
Exactly. The studies suggest that institutions need to be more proactive,
Okay.
about fostering international collaborations, setting up partnerships with institutions in other countries,
Okay.
exchange programs, just more support for researchers who want to work internationally.
It's like we need a whole new rule book for science in the 21st century.
Maybe we do.
But one thing that keeps coming back to me is this, like, tension between individual ambition and, what's good for society as a whole. We've talked about how individual scientists are driving this global network, but how do we make sure that doesn't come at the expense of bigger societal needs?
It's a valid concern. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of global collaboration,
Yeah.
chasing those big discoveries, getting recognition. But we can't forget that science should ultimately be about helping society.
Solving problems, making people's lives better.
Exactly. So how do we keep research grounded in real-world problems, even as it becomes more global? How do we stop it from becoming this, like, ivory tower thing, disconnected from everyday people?
Right.
One way, like we talked about before, is to get more people outside of academia involved.
Policymakers, community groups, industry folks.
Yeah, people who have a stake in seeing research actually make a difference in the world.
So it's about breaking down those barriers between science and society,
Making research more open, more collaborative.
where everyone has a voice. But that also requires a change in how we think about science, doesn't it?
For sure. We need to move away from that idea that science is just this purely academic pursuit
Right.
and recognize that it can actually solve real-world problems, improve people's lives.
It's a big challenge, but it feels really important, especially now with science becoming so globalized.
I think so, too. We need to build this culture of collaboration, not just within the scientific community, but between science and society as a whole.
Sharing not just data and resources, but ideas, perspectives, values.
It's a tall order, but a worthwhile one.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. International research is way more dynamic and complex than I ever imagined.
Yeah, really is.
It's not just about countries working together. It's about individuals making connections, sharing knowledge, pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Absolutely.
But like we've been saying, there are also challenges, big questions to answer. How do we shape this new era of global science? And that's what's so fascinating about this study. It gives us this snapshot of where we are now.
Yeah.
But it also raises all these questions, which is a good thing. It's a call to action for all of us, scientists, policymakers, everyone involved in research, to think critically about what we want the future of science to look like.
Well said.
It's clear that we're at this turning point. Science is becoming more global, more interconnected, more driven by individuals than ever before.
Definitely.
It's an exciting time to be involved in research, but it's also a time for reflection, for making careful choices as we move forward. And to our listeners, we want to leave you with this thought. What role do you see yourself playing in this whole global science revolution? What challenges and opportunities do you see in your own field? And most importantly, what kind of future do you want to help create? Something to think about. We hope this deep dive has given you some insights, sparked some new ideas. Thanks for joining us on this journey.